Hello and welcome to this applicant talk for Media and Culture degrees in the School of Politics, Philosophy, Languages and Communication Studies at UEA. I hope you're all well, I hope you're all safe, I hope you're looking forward to a bright new future studying at university, that you've got food on your plate, money's coming in and everything's alright. So before I go much further, I should introduce myself. My name is Ben Little. I'm a lecturer in Media and Cultural Politics, and I'm the course director for Media and Culture degrees here in the School of PPL. How do you end up doing the job that I do? Well, I'll give you a little bit of biography. I started off studying English literature, so I did English literature at Bristol University, and then I did an MA in Cultural Studies in an art school in Leeds, and then I did my PhD at Middlesex University in Media and Cultural Studies. I write about celebrity and activism. My first real subject though was comic books, so I wrote about the politics of comic books. I wrote a book on Russell Brand. There you go, he's in the picture. I'm pointing at it, but probably not on your screen. And I'm just finishing up one on Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and people like that. So that's me, and I'm sort of typical of the people who will teach you at UEA. If you're curious about what that picture is, that's me at the top of a volcano in Italy, and that picture I look exhausted. I was the proudest moment. I struggled to get to the top of a volcano, and then up behind me literally ran a group of about 30 70-year-old men. So yeah, it's a reminder of myself to be a little bit humble. Okay, let's go on. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a taster lecture about generation. And then after that, we're going to talk about the degree more generally and what it's like to study here and all that sort of thing. But generation is a subject that I'm quite interested in. I edited some books on this a while back. And it's something which you can study as a sort of sociological, cultural and political phenomenon in your second and third years. So in your second year, it will be a week on the optional module Media and Identity. And in your third year, it will be there's a whole module on media and generation and the media rather. So it's quite an interesting concept, and there's sort of various different ways you can approach it. So you can think about generations within families. So your parents, your grandparents, and you might all be of different generations, and understand yourself in those terms, like within sort of a biological family unit. Or it doesn't have to be biological, but a family unit. But there's also social and cultural ways to understand generation, and it's that second sort that I'm going to focus on today, just quickly. So this sort of picture is typical of what you think about when you see a sort of image of young people to sort of represent a generation, like your generation for most of you, I'm assuming. Apologies to any mature students in the viewing audience. So we can look at something like this and we can think about how young people understood, how we talk about them, how we also use young people as a sort of proxy for social change. So we put the burden of a changing society onto these sort of representational images of young people. And we can see quite clearly here, there's a group of people together, they're in a social environment, and yet they're functionally alone, using their phones, except they're not alone using their phones, right? They're probably communicating to each other, although I'm pretty sure the woman at the front there is playing a video game. But anyway, they're engaged with their phones, and this becomes a sort of a generational symbol of what's sometimes known as sort of Generation K after Katniss Everdeen, or that's probably a bit out of date, but certainly Generation Z is used quite a lot. And we understand young people in these terms as distinct from the baby boomers, millennials, Generation X, and so on and so forth. And one of the ways in which this group of young people, this sort of stereotype of young people, has been described is they're alone together, and that's by the psychologist Sherry Turkle. So there's sort of things which stem from this, right? So social media makes people anxious, it makes them narcissistic and entitled and lazy. All of these stories are sort of regularly circulating in the media, and is one of the ways in which sort of young people are not so much demonised but sort of dismissed. All right. So what are these generations? Are they like a real thing? We can see there might be some basis in demography, but not really that much, right? So If you look at your screen, you've got you've got the sort of people born from 1930 to 1940, and they're often known as sort of the interwar generation. So they're born between the two world wars, so they're often too young to actually fight in the Second World War, but they have a strong memory of it as children. But then after the Second World War, you have this huge explosion in children. Basically, people come back from war and they make a lot of babies. And so you have this thing called the baby boom. Now, the baby boom is interesting because it's actually not one but two separate booms. You can see from the graph, right? But we lump them all together culturally and socially. So maybe actually this sort of cultural definition of the baby boomer as people from 1945 to roughly 1965, born in those years, is not actually, there's not actually a sort of a demographic. It's not about births and deaths in that time. It might be something more cultural, which serves a different sort of purpose. Similarly, like, you know, Generation X, you can see there's this huge decline in births, and Generation Y, the millennial generation, is this kind of there is sort of a peak in the middle, but again, it's not like a consistent, like, huge number of people being born. So we might need to start asking some different questions. So here we go. Is it just about marketing? Now, this is where you get some really, really clear ideas of how generation works in our society. So Generation Z, you have just 8 seconds. This is what people in marketing advise advertisers to do to try and sell to people of these generations. So Generation Z, you've got just 8 seconds to engage them because that is your attention span. You know, any more than that and you're bored. So I'm pretty sure if that's true, all of you are switched off by now. You're gone, you're playing on your phones, and that's it. Maybe you're already, like, you know, deep into a game of Fortnite and you've just got this, like, switched on in the background. If that's true, shoot me now. Millennials, right? They're like, basically they're a bit trendy, they're really into Facebook, and they really like sort of influencers of various sorts, whether that's celebrity brand advocates or something like that. Again, I'm not really sure that's true. I'm technically a millennial. I can't stand that stuff, even though I write about it. So certainly not universal. Generation X. Now, these are the real slackers, right? These are the grunge generation, the people who, you know, friends, right? They don't really do anything. They sit around their flat and they talk a lot of nonsense. And they're, again, like, really into Facebook and into nostalgia. They like the past. Now, again, whether or not that's true, I don't know. But this is the story, right? And finally, you've got baby boomers. And they're, like, you know, sitting pretty, big pensions, large houses, and they're just idling away. And they're the ones you really want to target because they're the ones with all the money. That's like the marketing story. So there is this other story about it. We've got these sort of cultural ideas about these generations, and they're particularly used to focus advertising money. There is, however, some very material differences in terms of thinking about these generations. So this is a graph from an organisation called Generation Rent, who we worked with a couple of years ago on a third-year module called Activist Campaigning. So we worked with them to try and ban, well, successfully we got a change of government policy, although the policy hasn't gone through, to try and ban unfair evictions. So, like, people being evicted from rented accommodation at short notice. We worked on that with them. And here you can they can sort of show how housing patterns have changed since the financial crash of 2008. So something like the 2008 financial crash, you would have thought it sort of affects everyone equally, right? It's an economic disaster, but it doesn't. It's very, very, very specific in terms of the groups that it affects, right? So unlike any other recession in the last sort of 40 years, rather than jobs being lost across all age groups, jobs are protected for older people, and new jobs weren't created for younger people, right? So the economic impact was experienced generationally, right? And you can see this playing out in house prices and house ownership. So you see this brown line at the top, brown-purple line, and that's declining. That's owner occupations declining. And the blue line going up, that's private rented sector increasing. Now that gap there between those two lines is in fact a generational one. That is younger people being unable to afford to buy their own homes as they were historically in the past. So we can see these things manifesting in different areas, which isn't really about these sort of media stereotypes, isn't really about sort of young people being narcissistic or millennials being vain or something like that. It's actually about sort of the material organisation of resources in society. So we can understand generation in those terms as well. And there's also political terms. So 2011, 2010, there was this upsurge in activism, which was largely seen to be driven by social media. I mean, it was also obviously driven by the financial crash, which happened a couple of years before. But in Egypt particularly, there was an idea that there was a Facebook generation, the Shabab al-Facebook, the Facebook youth, who helped to overthrow the despotic president and institute a new society based on social media. Obviously, it didn't work out like that. The military took back over, and we now again are back in a dictatorship situation in Egypt. But at the time, there was this very clear idea that it was these new technologies and this new generation who are competent with them and could organise themselves differently and socially, who used them to transform the world, transform society. Time magazine had an activist on the cover as Person of the Year in that year. So this is really interesting, because again these discourses do a lot of work, right? They have a great sort of explanatory power to tell you what's going on in these sorts of situations. But actually the reality is not quite as true as that, right? Now there was traditional organising happening at the same time, and actually at the peak of the revolution in 2011, the internet was completely shut off, so no one had access to it. But the story of this generation, this heroic generation using social media to overthrow the government, had a lot of power. And actually Mark Zuckerberg, when he publicly listed Facebook, so he started to make the big money, said, oh yeah, we did that revolution, give us credit, and bump our stock price up a little bit. So we've got to think about these things, about what's real about them, what's not real about them, how generation works to obscure some things and open up others. And the clearest theorist of generation actually is not contemporary. He's a sociologist from Germany, writing after the First World War, and what he noticed, Karl Mannheim, was that young people whose first experience of society was in the post-war Germany had a very, very different set of ideas about what the world was like. And he called this fresh contact, right? So after a major historical event like a world war, there is a generational divide. And that generational divide is marked by the difference in society as a result of those events. So Edmonds and Turner, theorists of generation, writing more recently in 2005, so members of a generation are held together by the experience of historical events from the same or similar vantage point. Now this strikes me as really, really useful way to think about generation. How are we shaped by these social events? And if we were in person, I'd now get you to do an exercise where you try and think about what your fresh contact is, but instead I'm going to have to do it for you here. So what is your fresh contact? Well, there's the big one. There's the obvious one, right? There's COVID-19. Now, this is going to be an event which is historical. People will be talking about this in 100 years' time. Fingers crossed that we're all still here in 100 years' time. But this is going to be a major world event that you've lived through. And how it shapes your understanding of society, we don't know yet. But we know some of the common themes, this social remove, the social distancing, having to communicate with friends and families through means like this, or Zoom or Skype or whatever it is you're using, FaceTime. So you're going to be having a different sort of set of formative social experiences which are going to be shaped by this virus. And how that's going to work, we don't know. I mean, you could all want to be really, really close to each other all the time once we come out of lockdown. Or it could have other manifest in other ways culturally. Similarly, in this country anyway, definitely Brexit is a key thing. So the sort of withdrawal from the European Union, you might have different feelings about that depending on other factors other than generationally, but largely as a generation, younger people were opposed to Brexit. So that's a key sort of distinction. It was one of the key sort of things shaping the patterns of voting around Brexit and the patterns of support for Remain or Leave. And finally, social media. Now, not just social media in terms of the stereotypes, but actually living on, producing culture through engaging with in a deep, rich, profound way people of your generation were born into that. Again, apologies to any mature students. Were born into that in a way that older people weren't, right? And so your native experience of it means that you'll use it in different ways, and you understand it, and you'll transfer different sort of sets of values to it and from it. And obviously, in the mix with the virus now, that's going to be profound and different again from how we might have expected it to be even 6 months ago. All of that said, I want to just put some massive caveats out there. So there are some really hard limits of shared experience to all this, right? So we can talk about this in broad generalities, and it makes a lot of sense. Like, we can define and think about generation through something like COVID-19 or Brexit, but actually there are substantive differences which aren't tied to generation, which many of you will experience. So, for instance, with the virus, the sort of place you live will have a huge difference. Now, some of that might be to do with traditional class, right? So people from wealthier backgrounds will tend to have more space at home, which will make a big difference, right? But also, like, whether you live in the town or the country will determine how great an extent you sort of experience claustrophobia over this period. You might also think about just basic things. If you live in a garden, if you live in a flat, or you live in a house with a big garden, that's a really different experience right now of this virus. With Brexit, if you lived in the north or you lived in the south, those sorts of regional identities might be more important than generation in terms of determining where you vote, how you voted and all that sort of stuff. And on social media, whether you're male or female, a man or a woman, or neither, might seriously affect your experience on social media. If you're a woman, you're much more likely to experience abuse and harassment than you are if you're male, and if you're trans or non-binary, you might experience that to the nth degree. So yeah, generation is important, and generation does indicate some commonalities, but it can never tell the whole story, and that's kind of the thing which I want you to take away from this. All right. So, moving on. We are going to help you, rather than be passive representations of social change, we are going to help you become agents of social change. We're going to try and make you be able to take control of your future and take control of the path you take in the world and the sort of society you want to live in. That's really important to us. It sounds cheesy, I know, and it doesn't matter what generation you are, whether you're young or old. But we believe very firmly at UEA that education is about giving you the opportunity to make meaningful decisions and to be equipped with the critical faculties to be able to decide, how you live and what's a good way to live, and what sort of society you want to live in. So that's really what we're focused on, and that's really what we hope you'll get from the degree. And I hope, sort of in a sort of very potted format, that actually gives you an example of the ways in which we might teach you the concepts and the criticality you need to be able to do that. All right, so let's look at what some of the people who have gone before you have done. So here we have Kaylee. Now, one of the jokes about UEA is that people like Norwich so much that it's almost impossible to get them to leave. Kaylee obviously did not conform to that stereotype. She is off living in Melbourne, Australia, working in recruitment, she did a semester abroad there and liked it so much, back she went at the first opportunity. So there she is saying hello. On the other hand, Jono works as a social media content manager at Archant, which is in Norwich. So some people do stay. Others of our graduates do very exciting things, like Karen, who is now an MP, and while she's sitting in the chamber, she's sort of sitting there thinking about how useful her education at UEA was. I'm going to see if I can play a little video for you from Jack here. Now, Jack was one of my favourite students of the last few years. He was part of a leadership programme that we have running here, and ended up doing a TED Talk on mental health, and I'll just give you a little sample of the sorts of things that Jack did. So this is actually him in his first year. By his third year, I think he was running the department's Twitter account. But here we go. This is Jack.
So, when I was a wee lad, I wanted to look like this. And for those of you who don't know, that is the 2000s boy band Busted. And they are the coolest things you could possibly ever be. They were every girl's teenage heartthrob and every boy's envy. They sang songs about crashing weddings and getting with air hostesses, and they were amazing. So I tried my best, and I did try my best, and I ended up looking like this. Love that picture. So the question is, why did I care enough to want to look like that? Why did I actually get bothered about wanting to look like Busted? And it's because it is a society that I grew up in. And it's a society that represses creativity. And it's a society that encourages apathy, that tells us it's not cool to know things, and that it's not cool to go to school and try hard, that it's not cool to tell your family you love them openly, it's not cool to be openly in love with yourself, and it's not cool to express anything that is an absolute mediocrity.
So obviously Jack goes on to explain why and how those things should be cool, should be all right, and why you shouldn't be mediocre. And we very much believe in not letting you leave as mediocre graduates into the world. We want you to be exciting and interesting and engaged people. And how do we do that? Well, we have a basic sort of structure to our degree programs, and that is that right in the centre, in the middle of it all, is choice for you. So you get to choose and shape your degree program. We emphasise employability, so making sure you leave with the skills you need to get the jobs that you want to do, so you can take the sort of path in the world that you want to take. We make sure that you've not just been kept in beautiful East Anglia, that you've had chances to go abroad, to experience things internationally, but also that you've met people from all over the world, that you've learnt about the world, not just the sort of the immediate environs. So you have a better sense of what the world looks like. We really put a strong emphasis on teaching, on doing innovative and interesting teaching, which is also research informed, research led, so it's cutting edge. And hopefully, you're getting a sense of that already. And we also have a very strong sense of community. I mean, particularly in our school in PPL, we've got a really good foundation in terms of we work together, we get on with each other, we support each other, and we look out for each other. So that's really the sort of the five pillars of a UEA degree experience. So let's talk about them one at a time. So choice. Now, first of all, hopefully you should all have chosen your degrees by this point. There's three main degrees that I'm talking about here. There's quite a lot more degrees in the school as a whole, but the three we're talking about here are society, culture and media, politics and digital cultures, and culture, literature and politics. So society, culture and media is really our flagship degree. It's an interdisciplinary degree, which means you can draw on modules from all different sorts of subject areas. Kind of at its heart is cultural studies, so the study of culture as a lived experience, as a phenomenon that shapes how our societies work, and obviously in a massively mediated society is tied to how that society is mediated, so we understand our social worlds through the media. So it really takes those sorts of three things together and doesn't stop. So you can look anywhere within those three fields, and understanding those three fields is profoundly and deeply interrelated. Now, one of the areas which is obviously growing, is a lot of interest in, is expanding and transforming our society and our politics a lot, is politics and digital cultures. Now this is a very interdisciplinary degree, except it's got two sort of poles. So one is sort of sociology and cultural studies approaches to digital culture, and the other is formal politics. So it's understanding those two things together. So if you're interested in questions like, how did Donald Trump use Twitter to win the election? What was the role of Facebook in that election? That sort of thing will be really important to you. Likewise, what role does social media play in sort of the Brexit campaign? But also on a deeper level, how are things like platforms like Netflix or video games transforming how we understand our politics, how we relate to one another, and how we live together? So, thinking about questions of gender on Reddit, or thinking through things like Gamergate, those sorts of issues will be things you can explore on that degree. And finally, if you want something a bit more traditional in terms of culture, and you want to take some literature alongside your politics and your sort of cultural studies, then we have an option for you there. And like, the literature department here at UEA is world class. It's world famous, and you will get to sit in tutorials with leading English literature scholars, learning how to do close reading and that sort of stuff. Now, all of those 3 degrees I feel quite passionate about. All of them speak to, if you think back to my trajectory through academia, I started doing English literature, and now I'm doing lots of stuff around digital politics. I think they're great. I think it's a great set of degrees we've got on offer, and I think you'll have a wonderful experience doing them. But the key thing is not just sort of these headline degree titles, it's also what goes inside them, and those are called modules normally. So you might want to think in terms of on society, culture, and media. There'll be modules like media and identity, gender and power, so you can think across those sorts of relationships, like how do we understand ourselves in relation to the media? How does the media generate sort of the culture from which we can forge our own identities? And that's a module I teach, and I enjoy teaching that very much. But then you might think about that in more sort of explicit ways. So you might think about gender and power, and that's a whole module which looks at forms of feminist activism and how effective they are, and how they've been used in different ways to achieve sort of success for advancing the interests of women in society. So those are the sorts of modules you might do there, but obviously they're also available on other degrees as well. And you can kind of choose strands within these degrees. So if you're really interested in gender, there's definitely something like every year for you to take, and you can focus on it and then in your dissertation and so forth. But also these things are seeded in your first year modules, so you'll get some sort of tasters to the sort of other content you might do in your further years in your first year. Something like culture, literature and politics, you'll do a module like reading now, literally going into really intricate detail, close textual analysis of specific books, specific texts, and learning how to do that as a skill, which will, for me, my academic career is based on my ability to do close reading. It's the ability to sort of take a text and look in quite intricate detail about what it's trying to say and relating that to its surrounding context or the context of its readers. And yeah, it's a wonderful way to start a degree. But also, you'll be doing this degree in a UNESCO City of Literature, and you'll be thinking about the relationship of these sort of close textual skills alongside, learning from cultural studies and thinking about politics. So how does that relate to things like, how to do a close textual analysis, something like Trump's Twitter feed. But also there's like strong strands within this as well, so you can do, if you're interested in migration and human rights, there's sort of a key set of modules you could take around that. And that's actually a distinct sort of strength across the faculty here, stuff on migration. There's a migration studies research group, for instance. If you're doing politics and digital culture, this is a brand new degree starting this year. It's the first of its kind in the world. We're 99% certain of that, unless somewhere in a very far away place which we can't find has suddenly set one up. It really emphasises a key sort of set of strengths which you already have had for a long time, the UEA around digital media and digital culture. We've got some really, really great academics teaching it. You can do everything from sort of looking at digital media as a sociological phenomenon to the direct impact on politics, to looking at how algorithms are shaping our cultural policy. We've got 2 experts in cultural policy, media and cultural policy, in the department. So how does all this work? Well, in your first year you start to develop some foundational skills. You learn the core theory that you'll need to know for the rest of your degree, and you start to develop the sort of basic things you need to be able to act in the world, professional competencies we call them. In your second year, you then start to specialise. So you start to work out what it is you're interested in and start to build the expertise that you need to go on to your third year and do things like dissertations and so on and so forth. We'll vary learning modes a little bit in these times. A lot of the time you will learn lecture seminar, the sort of standard format at university, but you might also do more practical stuff, be doing workshops, going out into the world, that sort of thing. By your third year, we've got a real sort of orientation towards employability, towards you sort of leaving university and being able to step into the world of work. And I'll talk in a sec about how that works. But also at the same time, by your third year, you've become a quite sophisticated researcher. and you'll be able to do a dissertation if you choose on a topic that you have developed a particular specialism and interest in. And obviously you'll be supported the whole way through in doing that. But really by the time you get to your third year, you can produce, high level academic work as well. So that's the basic structure. Now in terms of this sort of exit trajectory, like leaving the university with the skills for the world of work, we do that by actually getting you to go and enter the world and demonstrate that you can use those skills. So one of the ways we do that is through a module called activist campaigning. It's a module I teach, and for that we bring a campaigning organisation, a real world campaigning organisation, into the university in what we call this reverse internship. Now 2 years ago, 3 years ago now even, we worked with Greenpeace, and you can see, I'm not going to show you the video, but there's a still from the video there of some of our students going out and filming support for their campaign with Greenpeace in Norwich. But that campaign was quite remarkable. Worked with Greenpeace on plastics, ocean plastics, and the students identified, nothing to do with me, they worked it out themselves, that nurdles, which are these sort of pre-consumer plastics, industrial plastics, they're like tiny, they're sort of tiny little things like that, the shape of a lentil, and they're what's used to make all sort of the plastic that you use, your bottles or your straws or whatever, originally start life as a nurdle. And they are transported often in quite haphazard conditions, and they're spilled into the sea. The students worked out that it's equivalent to a sort of an oil spill happening in slow motion every year, the amount of nurdles that get spilled into the sea. And to campaign on this, they wrote a law. They sent it to some MPs who had previously shown an interest in this sort of thing. The MPs loved it. Across all four major parties, so Labour, Liberal Democrats, SNP, Conservative. They actually ended up doing a lot of work with Conservative MPs. And they wrote a law, it got sent to the Public Bills Office, and we thought there was this chance of it actually being made into law, but the Minister replied to us saying, I'm sorry, we will work with our partners in the EU on this. So just as Brexit was happening, they were sort of citing our membership of the EU as the reason why they weren't going to act on this law the students have written. But we came tantalisingly close, and we were told that we'd actually changed the way the industry thought about the level of urgency to address the problems the students identified. So that was 2 years ago. Last year, I showed you a slide already, worked with an organisation called Generation Rent on unfair evictions and housing, so thinking about generation and what it means to rent or buy a home, and how those things are changing generationally. But also as part of that, we were invited to go to participate in a vigil at Grenfell Tower. And the students did, and we went, and you can see a photograph there of them at the Wall of Truth, which is under the Westway in Kensington near the tower, where a lot of the testimonies are kept and recorded. And the students made such an impression on the community there that we ended up sort of developing more of a relationship, and we planted a tree on campus, which is near Nelson Hall now, which you can go and see, to sort of mark the friendship between the community at Grenfell and UEA. So that's what we've been doing on that module, and that module really is designed as an employability module. So it's designed to take your skills in research, your ability to communicate to audiences, to think about how different bits of society fit together, and to run a campaign on that basis, working with a live campaigning organisation. And I think that's a unique module. I don't think you get a chance to do anything like that in very many other places. All right, so I'm going to hand over to Dan. Dan has very kindly recorded a video, well, not a video, some audio for us, and sent me some slides to sort of share with you his experience of doing society, culture and media at UEA. And without further ado, I shall hand over to...
Hi there, I'm Dan, and I'm currently a final year undergraduate student on the Society, Culture and Media degree programme here at UEA. Over my 3 years of study, I've had the chance to engage with a really diverse range of modules, which catered to my existing passions like studying the Chinese and German languages, while also developing new interests such as identity construction through media, globalisation and digital politics. Discovering new research interests has been a definite high point for me on the degree. I've explored so much from Japanese religious customs to 20th century Mexican cinema to documenting and investigating the experiences of LGBTQ+ students on the UEA campus. My favourite was probably a mixed method research project I did in second year on the gender representation of Japanese superheroes. And my dissertation, of course. I've been a student at UEA for 7 years now, and I really recommend studying here. Not just for the academic side, but the student life on campus has something to offer everyone. I've lived in the Ziggurats the past 3 years, and you really can't beat those views of the lake. You also have so many different ways to spend your spare time. While I've been here, I've written for the uni's Spanish language magazine, been a course rep, and worked a bunch of different jobs, from the campus shop to the accommodation rep scheme to a summer internship in the Collaborative International Programs office. In the coming autumn, I'll be a postgraduate student here in PPL, so best of luck and hope to see you around campus.
Thank you, Dan. Dan is truly wonderful. He is hoping to stay on with us to do a MA in Media and Cultural Politics. I suspect he's likely to get in, and we are very happy that he is still hanging around. He's a great student. He's a wonderful example of the sort of experience you can have at UEA, the sort of range of things you can do. So, moving on. Let's talk about international. So we are definitely international in our orientation. We might be in the sort of the wonderful wilds of Norfolk, but we are looking outwards to the rest of the world. In your second year of your second semester, this is sort of the most straightforward way you get international experience. You can go and spend 6 months in another country, a semester abroad. And there's a real range of places you can do. We've got articulation agreements, that means we've got sort of partnerships with all these different universities across the world, so particularly Japan and America. We've got very strong connections. Australia, you heard before. English language provision in European countries, so Netherlands and so forth. We've got some in China and South Korea as well. So there's a real range of places you can go should you choose to spend that sort of second half of your second year away. We're also in our school, the School of Politics, Philosophy, Language and Communication Studies. There's obviously a lot of language provision. So as a PPL student, you will be able to study a foreign language in a number of different ways. So you can just do it as an option, and you can do it for free. So in other bits of the university, you might have to pay for some of these things, but within PPL, everything is free for students and for staff, actually. So you can do all these languages at different levels. So from scratch, post-GCSE and post-A-level. There's different offers for different languages at different times, so you will have to check and make sure you read your emails when you get them. But basically, if you want to develop another language, like Dan talked about doing, that's really possible for you to do. It's really available. And finally, employability. We talked a little bit about sort of the way in which that's built into the curriculum, but beyond the curriculum, there's all sorts of opportunities. So we have study trips to places like Brussels and Geneva. These are changing a little bit at the moment. I think the international officer in the school is looking at Mallorca, but I don't know if that's come off yet. So looking to develop those sorts of links. You have opportunities of internships, when that's from business, government, NGO, charities, that sort of thing. Whatever it is that you want, there are opportunities there should you be able to grasp them. There's a research placement opportunity which has led to students doing being embedded, sort of, we talked about reverse internship with activist campaigning, but actual internships where you do a specific discrete piece of research for an organisation. Now often that's been MPs, because we've obviously, there's politics in the school, but also working with charities and campaigning organisations. So you'll be given a brief from them, and then you go off and you do a piece of research for them, which they then publish, if it's good enough. That is, normally it gets published. So that's another way in which you develop your employability skills. But also there's opportunities within the Students' Union, which you really should take up if you're here. So we've got an activist academy, we've got a model UN, there's a womanist society, and there's all sorts of media outlets. So Dan talked about the Spanish language magazine, but there's also a very prominent campus newspaper called Concrete, which lots of our students work on, and have gone to great careers in journalism as a result of their initial experiences on. We've got a radio station. Nearly all of my students seem to have a radio show of some sort. They must be doing it in the middle of the night, and that's why their essays are late. But yeah, that's great. Livewire Radio is a really great resource, and I'm sure you can find that online. So there's loads of opportunities on campus and sort of extracurricular. And we also have a wonderful careers service which puts on all sorts of events for you throughout the year to sort of give you a taster of what working in different industries might look like. Now, often these are very senior industry professionals will show up at these events and give you sort of like the inside track on how to do well in those sectors. But also that's complemented by all sorts of workshops offered by Careers Central, CV advice, There's a mentorship scheme with alumni. So really, you work out what it is you want to do, and we'll help you do it. That's pretty much how it works. All that sounds great, but do we know what we're doing? Yes, we do. We're amazing. We're amazing, honestly. We have a big gold stamp next to our teaching, thanks to the government. I'll talk a little bit about that in a sec, though. And we also are very much the experts in our fields. So when you're studying on the degree, you'll often be set readings written by the people teaching you or other people in the department. So there's just a selection of the sort of books that have been published recently, by colleagues on the screen there. So by all means, pause it, go and look them up, have a read, see what you think. Not all of them are written, primarily for undergraduates, but some of them are. And we do a good line in textbooks as well, writing textbooks. So when you do your first year media power module, that's a textbook written by a colleague on media theory. So really you're at the cutting edge at UEA, and you're teaching, and we really do invest and care about our teaching, but it is directly informed by our research. Our researchers also sort of have international profiles. So Lee Jarvis, who's a terrorism and security expert in the school, he's regularly on TV, sort of talking about terrorism, basically. Marina, who's in the media group, she's on TV all the time, doing talking head stuff about things like Brexit or austerity. She's a very passionate public speaker. And then we have people like Toby, who is the international leading expert on election integrity, and so he does those sorts of things on TV, but also in Parliament quite regularly, like advising, and not just our government, but all sorts of governments about how to run elections. So you'll be learning from people who are really not just writing the great material, but also out in the world disseminating it and and advising all sorts of people on it all. Like Sally, for instance, who you'll do lies, algorithms and concertos with, she writes media policy across the EU for various different governments. All right, so all this sort of comes together in quite regular sessions. So every Wednesday we have a staff student lunch session where we might debate something, or we'll have a special talk on, which the whole school will come together for, and that's really great. So it's not just that we'll go off and do this and it doesn't really impact on you. We bring the two things together. So students and lecturers together have this sort of shared experience of each other's expertise and knowledge and enthusiasm. We're also really acutely aware of that there is a sort of mental health epidemic going on at the moment, and we're really acutely aware of that, and really do as much as we can to support students who have difficulties or struggle in that area. And obviously with COVID, that's probably just going to get worse. So we are very, very attentive to that. There are sessions around things like managing panic, which we've run at various times. We've got an embedded team in the faculty who help people deal with sort of life difficulties, and we're also on this spectacularly beautiful campus, and that's one of our lecturers, Helen, and her dog Em, who are sitting next to our wonderful lake looking back at the university. We do have support dogs as well. We've had therapy dogs sort of on campus quite a few times to sort of help people just feel nice by hugging a dog. So yeah, I like dogs. I'm not allergic to them. I'm allergic to cats, so that's less fun for me. Cool. And we also have, if you really like dogs, we also have a dog walking initiative. So there's opportunities for students to walk dogs, to get some exercise, and to play with a lovely beast. All right. This last couple of slides just really showing you and reassuring you that you're going to a really top university when you come to UEA. Now, I want to do that, I want to say that, and I want to guarantee you that that is true, but also I just want to give you something to think about as you're doing this. Now, all of these numbers you're about to see are things that are produced through various different metrics, various different ways of organising and understanding what happens at university. And one of the things we'd hope that you come to at the end, when you finish your degree, is a real sort of sense that you understand how these numbers are manufactured, they're produced, that universities as institutions which compete with each other and compete for these rankings, these ratings, are are produced in that way by policy, by culture, by society, in all sorts of different ways. So, you know, when we sort of say here that our research is 70% of it is internationally excellent or world leading, we want you in your research to be able to critically unpick what that means. What does it mean to say that? What is it actually saying about UEA as an institution? What are the processes by which these things are produced? You know, likewise, we're a top 20 department in the country. Well, how has that been decided? What are the different things which are feeding into the complete university guide to allow you to make sense of what that means? And again, all of these things. So we want you to be reassured that you're going to a place that is good, but we also want you to be able to be critical of the sorts of ideologies, the sorts of bureaucratic practices which go into producing these sorts of kite marks. So that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. I hope it's piqued your interest. If you want to get in touch with me, my email is b.little@uea.ac.uk. And really, just to finish up, I'm really looking forward to seeing you next year. We're looking forward to meeting you all properly in September. I know I've met some of you already on open days and that sort of thing. Yeah, for the time being, stay safe. Don't get COVID. Try not to give anyone COVID. Look after your family. Look after your neighbours. And don't worry, like, you know, there is a bright future ahead, and you're going to have a great time at university when you make it here. And, you know, all things will pass. So yeah, great. See you in September.